The Fountainbridge Tangle Witch and the Dark Miracle by Sarah Louise Marshall. Once there was a tangle witch with nowhere to go. Every time she stopped, the people said no. It was a very hard life to always be on the hoof, but she had a magic bag. Its lid was a roof. For days and nights she hid out in the woods, hoping no one would find her, but someone always could. A craggy crop of rubble seemed the best place to land, since a bumper crop of coltsfoot grew out of toxic sand. The Tangle Witch had seeds which she was quick to sow, and she wished to remain for many tomorrows. Unbeknownst to her, and perching up on high, there was a king of crows who planned a black coat empire. Somehow she must have sensed it, somehow she knew, for when she went to sleep, terrible dreams would ensue. Then one day, while passing a churchyard, Tangle Witch discovered an old forgotten corpse. It was of an old crow, but his feathers were still bright, and she thought to make a headdress for her dances in the night. She took it home, pressed against her chest. She said an incantation to lay the bird to rest. Yet overhead and looking down, another bird was watching this and found it quite absurd. "She has killed my wife I've been looking for, and look at her dress, it looks like she sleeps on the floor. I'll treat her mean in an invisible war until she no longer remains and leaves of her own accord." He sent down all his menaces to batter down her door, and he poured poisonous chemicals on the plants that she adored. Every time she went out, he moved around her things. He tampered with her gaslight and stole the words from the songs she sings. The final straw came when she walked around the rock. 3 times she did it, just like resetting a clock. This was really old magic that she wasn't supposed to know, but somehow she did, and it further angered King of Crows. Then in flew all his minions, carrying Prince Albert's drops, that rapidly ignited as the Crow King took off. Poor puzzled Tangle Witch, now with no home. She couldn't quite believe it. What had she done? She gathered all her things and put them in a shop, but it was just around the corner from where the Crow King grew up. Again he sent his minions, who had keys for the lock, to mess with her head, knowing she would lose the plot. A million bees came swarming all around the cross, and they carried her away to a garden not yet lost. She made a dear friend by a castle in the sky, but like all pink elephants, he said, "Do or die." So she began to grow her garden, which started to flower in spring, but when it came to August, no one could see a thing. So she dragged out all the plants into the middle of the road with a sign that said, "Please don't forget about the natural world." But every time she grew something, the thieves would be in, and the rats with dark thoughts were all whispering. There was a magic potion which she began to drink, as it meant she didn't have to listen or think. Then one day the rats set a trap and pretended there was a fire, so the alarm went off. Tangle Witch was frightened, but they followed her around, hoping they could scare her right out of town. There were some other creatures who had heard of Tangle's plight, and they gladly kept an eye out as she moved in the night. She knew an old sea dog who came to tow her boat out to the open ocean at the end of the road. Then one day she went sailing out to sea. The seagulls came a-circling. She said, "Hey, leave me be." They took all her nice things and dirtied what was clean. They pretended to be her friend, but they were cold and selfish beings. For Tangle had nothing at the end of that day. The seagulls went off to find some other prey. A giant sent a wave all across the world to send a magic box with wheels that whirled. So off she ran all around the isle, shouting, "Read all about it," all the while. She'd written everything down in a magic book, and she invited everyone to come take a look. As she sped up, the shouting got real loud, so it came as no surprise when the Crow King found out. Now, what with everyone watching, there was nothing he could do, so he packed up his bags and threw his crown away too. He tried one more time to stab her in the back, but her friends had had enough of this pyromaniac. So they held out their arms and they just said no, and his vitriol went up in a puff of smoke. So Tangle went back off for a rake in the bins. This isn't a crime or a sin. A big hand came from a supernatural place. It forced her in a box. It didn't have a face. Again she began to run for her dear life, but the box just got bigger with no end in sight. So she sat down. She needed time to think and to conjure up a mirror after 42 wings. In it she saw a girl she thought she knew, and behind her lurked a terrifying bogeyman too. Tangle grabbed the stone she found on the way in, and she smashed in the glass, freeing the child within. And with that, the stolen girl suddenly grew, bigger than a house into the cosmos she zoomed, up to a planet where only disgusting things dwell, and on it she dumped the bogeyman. Phew, he smelt. A pangolin came from far, far away. I come bearing a gift, I want you to stay. Here, take this plant, please don't flit. I think you'll know what to do with it. She absconded with the plant and climbed the kirk steeple. The seeds flew off on the wind, drifting off to seek the people. Then a craft ascended through a portal in the sky. Tangle Witch was taken as it slowly glided by. On board stood a creature. He said his name is Fred. We've met when you were sleeping, or so he said. What do you want? He said, dead clear. And as he bended over, she whispered in his ear. I want wars to end. I want rivers to run clear. I want folks wi' nae hames to hae them this year. If only folk who are cruel and greedy seen the error o' their ways, all the really braw folk could make earth a happy place. On that same day, the hungry ghost rose. Tangle Witch made the most spectacular host. As the night drew in, Fred held her near. You need your own space. You can grow your garden there. So in a flash, in that garden she stood, next to a house in an old gnarly wood. And as she lit the fire, sparks flew around, and as the moon rose on the horizon, she was safe and sound.